Hello, I am Jason Watkins.
I am Eric Watkins.
Warren Cole.
Seth Taylor.
Jennifer Mann.
Courtney Dickerson.
Lauren Lasley.
Scott Ward.
Brandon Collins.
And I am Justin Mitchell, giving the speech. I'm going to give you an informative speech tonight. By the way, this is my class, a big torture to do this. EMS through time. And of course, this is not working. There we go. EMS has not always been what it is today. Actually, as a profession, we are less than 50 years old, which is, most of you who are in your 20s probably think, wow, that's pretty bad, that's pretty old. Actually, it's not that old compared to when you have medical schools that are hundreds of years old and nursing hundreds of years old as well. So, as far as a profession, we're very young. It all started with a man who fought in the Napoleonic Wars alongside with Napoleon. His name was Dominique Jean Luret. He was actually Napoleon's head surgeon, and he was actually known to go out and actually get wounded soldiers and drag them back or bring them back to his hospital. So it's kind of the first makeshift ambulance. What is also unique about him as well is he didn't just do his own soldiers. He actually would go out and retrieve all soldiers. Now granted, they would keep them as prisoners of war, but he would still go out and help them. And that's what he's credited to make for us as far as our profession. That was essentially one of the first ambulances. Pretty simple, horse-drawn carriage, box on the back, couple wheels, go out, get people, and come back with them. It really wasn't until World War I that we actually started having true ambulances. Funded by the Red Cross and a bunch of rich volunteers before the U.S. entered World War I, they actually would go over and have an ambulance service that would go and try to retrieve soldiers that were wounded, bring them back to their MASH units, and actually try to work on them. It really wasn't until we were actually thrust in the war that the actual U.S. Army got on board. World War II came along. It really wasn't until then that we actually had combat medics. Usually, things start in the Army, and it comes out to the actual civilized population. It's actually reversed. The Army didn't have enough funding to actually make medics and actually have people that were trained enough in medical care to go out and do this. So it actually wound up being private sector trained, recruited by the Army, and then put into play. One of the things that I do want to call attention is, usually it's a Red Cross. That's where the Red Cross came from, was on the medic's helmet. The bad part about this is usually that was a big target. Anyone looking through a gun down a scope would usually aim for the medic. Two reasons. One, kill the medic. You can't have injured soldiers come back and fight again. Also, it's a pretty easy target to shoot somebody with. Fun fact. But what they really specialized in was trauma, and they also did a lot of pain management. If you ever seen Band of Brothers, you'll notice that there's a lot of morphine given. They used a lot of morphine for pain management. So, you pretty much had combat medics, and up until that point, nothing was really done beyond that. There were ambulance services, don't get me wrong. There people came out, picked you up, put you in the back of an old hearse, and they would drive you to the hospital. Two people would go, nobody would ride in the back. So in 1966, the National Academy of Sciences produced a paper called the White Papers, and it was titled Accidental Death and Disability, the Neglected Disease of Modern Society. And what it was saying was basically, you actually had a better chance of survival being shot in the Korean War and getting medical care than you were on your own streets of America. People actually go ahead and have car wrecks, very bad car wrecks, and their morbidity was horrible. More people died on U.S. soil from trauma than they did in foreign soil. So, they're stuck, they're trying to figure out what to do. They start trying to make these paramedicine programs. And it really wasn't catching a lot of national attention. It wasn't until this show, Emergency. Has anybody seen this show? This show is awesome. It's on Netflix. Binge watch some of it. It's amazing. And you'll laugh because you'll be calling like, no, that's not right. That's not right. But the idea was basically it's supposed to be LA County, and there's a paramedicine program. It started by those two doctors in the back, and they actually train guys to go out and work in the field. Very limited on what they could do. They'd have to call orders for an IV. Imagine if you guys had to call for orders in IV. It's crazy, isn't it? Crazy. And again, it was still trauma related. Where we are today, it's not the same. We now have NREMT. You guys are very familiar with NREMT. That's shaking his head. Has to do with your testing. And basically now we have a scope of practice. It's usually individualized by state. The state says what you can and cannot do. There's now a standard of care. We actually try to do things the same thing we do here in Georgia, and in California, as in New York. We try to have a standard of care. We're actually doing more medical. We're not just doing trauma. We actually carry upwards about 90 drugs on the trucks nowadays to actually give in certain situations. And it makes us clinically sophisticated, customer service driven, and system integrations. So what have I seen in the past 10 years? Lucas, believe it or not, Lucas device, when I started 10 years ago, wasn't very prevalent. It just started becoming recently popular in the past 5 or 6 years. It's a great device. Frees up a rescuer, gives great CPR. It also makes it so rescuers aren't tired. They don't have to swap in and out. Because after about 10 minutes of CPR, that boy's sweating. End-tidal CO2, capnography. It's kind of a basic concept when I started, but it's really become very prominent. It has to do with a lot of respiratory complaints. You can actually see how a patient is trending based on their end-tidal CO2. King Vision. This is actually fairly new. This is probably less than a year old that I'm aware of. No longer do you have to actually go in and manually try to go in and find, for paramedics, to go in and find the actual vocal cords. Now it's simply drop a piece of plastic with a camera on it and slide your tube. Very simple. And the last thing that I've really seen come into play is 12-lead EKGs. 12-lead EKGs. Not just 12 leads, because they've been around, but live monitoring of a 12-lead. You can literally watch progression as it happens in a cardiac event, especially a heart attack. So what's the future? The future is really community paramedicine. Has anyone heard of this? This is a big push. What they basically are trying to do is they're trying to take one paramedic on one truck by himself. 911 services are using for non-emergency calls. If a call comes out and it's just someone that's a frequent flyer, or somebody stubbed their toe, or somebody just wants some sort of patient evaluation, it's cheaper and easier to send one paramedic on a truck by himself with a bunch of stuff, tools, diagnostic equipment, evaluate the patient, and if they need to be transported, call for an ambulance. Another thing that they're trying to use them for is somebody that actually has routine, like they have blood checks, sugar checks, whatever. Send this guy out here, check on the patient, evaluate them. If they find something wrong, then call for an ambulance. Another thing that's going to be utilized, and it's by the doctor's offices. Go out and follow up with these patients. Don't have them come back into the office to be seen. They don't need to. That's eating up a lot of patients' times, it's eating up a lot of waiting room time. Send this guy out there in the comfort of their own home, evaluate them. If there's a problem, get the doctor online and talk to them and figure out what needs to happen from there. It's pretty interesting stuff. Basically what's happened is, the way doctors used to be, they'd come out and see you. Now they're just sending somebody in their place. Once again, it's almost as if you're going to have a doctor make house calls again. That's my speech. Those are my references. Thank you very much for listening. Good night.